of the Santa Rosa Island Research Station here at Cal State Channel Islands. And I am very, very fortunate and happy to be here today to be able to introduce you all to Federico Mendez and Luciana from GECI in Mexico, a pretty incredible NGO that's doing some amazing island conservation work in Baja California. And they are here as part of this Islands of the California Botanical Collaborative workshop that I have this super cool shirt from that I think Luke will be here later, one of our art professors here. This is a organization of botanists and conservation scientists across the islands of the Californias, from the Farallon Islands down to Mexico, that work together on island plant-related issues and restoration. And we are having a workshop at the Santa Rosa Island Research Station right now. They all just went out this morning on the boat. And I felt very strongly that it would be great to have some of these amazing folks from GECI, and these are two of their senior staff, here to talk to folks on our campus. So we are actually flying out to the island this afternoon to join that workshop. But really happy to have them here today. And with no further ado, I think it's going to be a bit of a tag team talk. I'll turn it over to Fede. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Good morning. It's really great being here. Thanks, Rosa, for the invitation. And we're, as Rosa was saying, we're an NGO based in Ensenada. We just turned 24 years on past Friday, so we're celebrating. And it's been a long journey, and that's why we call the talk Challenges and Opportunities, because of course on island restoration, and as you know by Rosa, and if you have had the chance of being on Santa Rosa Island or other Channel Islands, it's challenging to work on islands, but it's really remarkable and encouraging because you can see the results that conservation do. So that's some of the ideas we want to talk to you about and show you what we have on Mexico island-wise. So the first thing you should know is that Mexico has a lot of islands. It's almost 4,500 islands around the country. So all the white dots are like just to show you that we have islands everywhere around the country. And that makes, because Mexico is so big, it's very different ecosystems on the islands. So I just want to show you that we have like the temperate islands similar to the Channel Islands on the Baja California Peninsula in the Pacific. Then we have desert islands on the Gulf of California. And then we start with more like subtropical ones in central Mexico, like off Nayarit and Sinaloa, etc. And then we have the really tropical ones in the Mexican Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico. And so I just want to take you to a journey for some of the islands. So this is the Coronado Archipelago. It's just in front of Playas de Tijuana, like right in the border with the US and with San Diego. And then one characteristic of the islands are seabirds, and in particularly the Baja California Pacific Islands, as the Channel Islands, they're rich on seabirds, and Mexico hosts 1 in every 3 seabird species recorded in the world. So it's really important because they only nest on the islands, and they breed there, and they forage around the islands as well. And that's because we have the California current coming from Alaska to the south, and that's very rich waters and upwelling systems that make these islands rich in marine productivity, and that's why they sorry, my timer not to go over the time. And then we have lots of biodiversity. The northern elephant seal, Ross was saying that you have like 25,000 northern elephant seals on Santa Rosa, on the whole Channel Islands.
Yeah.
And one interesting thing is that Guadalupe Island, and I will show you where Guadalupe Island is, and we will talk more about Guadalupe. It was thanks to Guadalupe and a bunch of these guys that were there saved from extinction. Because of that, just few animals that were on Guadalupe, and then they started going to all of the islands in Mexico and the US. And we also have important and significant things. This is the Cedros Island mule deer. It's just one of the few endemic deers to an island in the world. And so this is in Cedros Island. That's like the middle tip of the Baja California Peninsula. It's a big island. It's the 4th biggest island. And then the link to the local communities. Most of these islands are inhabited, and it's not indigenous people, but it's artisanal fishermen that have been living there for 70, 80 years. And they promote sustainable fishing. So these guys have Marine Stewardship Council certification for their lobster fishery, and that's something that they are wanting to really connect and transfer to the work that we do on the islands on restoration. So we work a lot with fishing communities on these islands. And then we move south and to the Gulf of California. If some of you have heard of La Paz, or you've been on La Paz, this is Espiritu Santo Island. It's a World Heritage Site. It's really renowned. And it's as you can see, a different type of ecosystem. This is like more desert-like type of ecosystem, also very rich waters. And again, more endemic species. This is the Espiritu Santo ringtail cat. It's only found on Espiritu Santo. And just until a few years, it was being predated by feral cats that were present on the island. Then we have interesting things, evolution. This is on an island in the Gulf of California, Santa Catalina, near Loreto. And it's a rattlesnake, but if you can look closely, there's no rattle on the snake. And that's because there's no predators to these species on the island. So over the years, it lost the rattle, and that's because she doesn't need it, right? And so that's the interesting things that happen on islands. And then we jump onto the Mexican Central Pacific, that this is the Eastern Tropical Pacific, and we have the Revillagigedo archipelago. It's probably one of the crown jewels with Guadalupe Island in Mexico, and this is the most remote archipelago we have. It's like 2 days boat. It's like 1,000 kilometers from the mainland Mexico. And so this is really, really pristine, really remote, but there's invasive species on these islands that we've been dealing with and managing as well. For example, other interesting facts is like green sea turtles. If the Revillagigedo archipelago wasn't there, these green turtles wouldn't have migrated from the Eastern Tropical Pacific from the Western to the Eastern Tropical Pacific. So the islands also are, this theory of stepping stones over the ocean. So that's something. And then we have also a lot of richness. And I was saying that Mexico hosts 1 in 3 seabirds, but we're the second in the world with endemic species of seabirds. And the Townsend's chipwater is one of those cases. It's probably one of the most threatened species in the world. Just 100 individuals remain on the Revillagigedo archipelago in a couple of islands. And that's because of the impacts imposed by feral sheep, invasive species, and feral cats as well. And then we move to the Mexican Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico, and you can see the difference. These islands in the Baja California Peninsula and the Gulf of California are big, are high, and the ones in the Gulf of Mexico are more like atolls and low-lying islands, really threatened because of sea level rise as well. And so we've worked as well in these islands, and the same characteristic remains. Like seabirds are equal to islands and vice versa. I mean, you can have these seabird colonies if you don't have safe and good condition islands. And also the link with local communities. Like in the Baja California Peninsula, we have fishing cooperatives. It's the same in Southeast Mexico. And it's also fishing for abalone and lobster in Baja California, for lobster in the Southeast Caribbean, Southeast Mexico. And they were key partners on doing invasive species work, because there's the linkage of public health, because rats, for example, they cause problems with public health. And of course, they were the most interested on us removing the rats, for example, from this island in the Gulf of Mexico called Banco Chinchorro. And of course, again, they are the ones committed, because they are there all day long, 365 days a week, a year, I'm sorry. And so after we remove the rats, for example, they are really committed to biosecurity. They don't want rats anymore on their islands, so they're the ones doing biosecurity every time they go to the islands. So with all of these, I just want to convince you that islands are a conservation priority. Like in Mexico, I was saying, the importance of the islands for seabirds. 1 in every 3 species nests on islands in Mexico, and we're at the second place in endemic species. We have like 12 species that are mostly restricted to nesting on Mexican islands and breeding on the seas around. And then there's also a bigger picture about islands, that they contribute to Mexico's territorial seas. So thanks to remote islands like Guadalupe that you can see here, or the Revillagigedo archipelago that I was telling you about, you can see these big like bubbles. That's because the presence or the occurrence of the islands there. So Mexico has a big economic zone. So all you can see is that green is like the land portion of Mexico, but all the blue that you can see, it's also part of the Mexican territory in the sea. So islands also contribute to this exclusive economic zone. And then islands are also important, are key because they host 9 endemic species against the mainland. So we have a lot of endemic species. And then the biggest threat is invasive species, and we have lost 21 of all 24 recorded species extinctions on Mexico have occurred on islands. And that's because of the presence of invasive alien species. So we have recorded 24 extinctions in Mexico. 21 of them have occurred on islands, and 17 of those 21 are because of the presence of invasive species. So like 80% of extinctions in Mexico are because of invasive species on islands. So they are a really big threat. And so we started doing like a plan to remove invasive species, but we wanted to do it, knowing what we were doing, and so we started with doing a prioritization to see which islands first, based on a few criteria about, cost, feasibility, reintroduction, probability. So we have this like plan that we started following up from 20 years now, and then the recognition that island restoration work, and that there's islands that need to be taken care of as a priority because of the endemic species or the threatened species they host. So this is a paper where there's a global analysis about how removing invasive species from which islands will bring the most benefits to biodiversity. And we have there 10 Mexican islands, 4 in the top 10, where conservation actions will make a significant global contribution to biodiversity. And so progress today, this is Guadalupe Island. This is a fence that we built up in the south portion of the island to protect nesting seabirds like the Lysan albatross from feral cats. And that's like a first step in the whole kind of restoration process. We're now moving into the cat eradication, and eventually when we remove the cats, well, the fence will go up, will go out of the island, we will need it. And this is an example on Socorro Island, the Revillagigedo National Park. This is Socorro Island. It's a 13,000 hectare island. It's quite high. It's still volcanic activity on the island. There's a volcano on the top. And there were feral sheep on the island. They were brought by whalers, Australian whalers and Russians as well. And so 100 merino sheep were introduced in 1869. And of course, since then, they caused vegetation loss. You can see the pictures that, there were herds of sheep, and practically they devastated the vegetation on Socorro. And we got funding from a binational fund from between the US and Mexico, so each country put a proportion to work on different islands, and Socorro was one of the few. And so we removed the sheep, like, ungulates have been removed from the Channel Islands as well, between 2009 and 2012. And this was done with aerial hunting, ground hunting as well. And you can see that from 100 merino sheep that were introduced more than a century ago, we moved almost 2,000 in just a few years. So, and then what happens when you remove invasive species? And it was just without doing anything else, but just removing the sheep. We did this analysis on how vegetation changed between 2008 and 2013. It's just like 5 years in difference. 2008, we still had sheep on the island. 2013, we didn't. And so you can see the difference. This is a vegetation index comparison. So all you can see in the last map, all the red is new vegetation that came back to the island. So like 11% in just 5 years came back just by removing the sheep. And you can see the difference. This is the same place. And you can see how from 2009 that we were doing the eradication up to 2014, how that same place completely changed. So this is the type of results you get of working on islands and doing restoration. We also have feral cats on Socorro. We've been working there for about 8 years now. And that's because there's challenges regarding methods to use. So we could use poisons on the island, and probably we would have finished 5 years ago. But we, in a way, are not allowed to use the poisons that are the best option. So we started working just with trapping and hunting, and working on an island, you can imagine, going to every cat territory is challenging. So we have to use all the methods we get. We have detection dogs that look for cat presence, absence, and so we use them a lot. And then we have to move on different type of settings, including helicopters. And so again, after we started working with removing the cats, there's just a few cats remaining on Socorro. We started seeing how the endemic species started recovering. One of the most threatened species by cats were the endemic Socorro blue lizard, and you can see how after I started working with removing the cats, it started recovering on Socorro. And then most of the work is to restore the whole island ecosystem. And for example, this is the endemic thousands Chihuahua, the one I was saying before. It's just 100 individuals present on Socorro and Clarion Island in the Revillagigedo archipelago. And of course, the cats were wreaking havoc on this species. So after starting with working with the cat eradication, because it's not just removing the invasive species and leave the island. I mean, the island will recover, but it probably will take time. And there's going to be some species that doesn't recover at all. So in the case of the thousands Chihuahua, because they were so few, we started doing social attraction. That's a method to either put like artificial burrows for the species to see if it nests, and start playing recordings of the species during like reproduction time. And so we, for the first time in, I don't know, like 50 years, we got the first thousand Chihuahua nesting on Socorro, at least the recording of it on an artificial burrow just a few years ago. And then we go to the San Benito Oeste Island, and that's a link with the local fishing community. And what happened there is that we have this 3-island chain archipelago, and it's one of the most seabird diverse islands in the Baja California Peninsula, and probably in Mexico. It's about 2 million birds nesting there every year, 13 different species. So it's a seabird heaven. And then there's this local fishing community that harvests abalone and lobster. It's a very committed community. They have a green label for their fishing practices for lobster in particular. But every year, when there's lobster or abalone season, they come back and forth from San Benito Archipelago to the Cedros Island. And they move everything, mattresses, kitchen, the whole thing. The whole families move from one island to the other. And so there's the map showing, and so there's an endemic mouse on Cedros Island, which is endemic, native to the island, not an invasive species, but taken to San Benito in one of these movements, it becomes an invasive species on San Benito, which is a safe haven. And there's not been any mouse or rats present on San Benito Island ever, so the birds don't have a defense mechanism to fight back. So the good thing of this is that we have this great relationship with the fishing community, and they call us and say, hey, we think that we move the endemic mouse from San Benito to, from Cedros Island to San Benito. And that's really worrying, because in just a few years, a couple of mouse could produce 5,000 offspring. So we had to act quickly, and so when they told us, and that's the great thing of it, is that they really own the problem and say, we want to do something about it. It's probably caused by us, and we want to do everything we can to help and remove these mouse from the island. So we started working, we started with the monitoring. We needed to confirm which mouse species or rat species was, so we could decide which method to remove the mouse from the island used. And then we started working on this, and we finally removed the mouse on November 2013 with a really complete collaboration work with the fishing community, but also the Navy in Mexico. The Mexican Navy really supports this work, and so it's the only way we could do this kind of big, bold conservation, restoration projects there. So that's the Mexican Navy helping out. And this is a technique where you cover the whole island with a helicopter, sowing a specific bait for the mouse, and this is like a resulting map that you have covered the whole island to ensure that every mouse gets a bait and eventually you remove them in whole. So this is just a few examples of what we have been doing on invasive species management. And you can see this map, that's the result of a 20+ year trajectory. We already have completed like 60 eradication on 39 islands without in Mexico. So the green dots, you can see that's completed eradications. The one in yellow are the ones we're working right now on them, and the ones, the red triangles are the ones pending. And it becomes challenging as you go, because we started, with the small islands, uninhabited, but then you start working on bigger and bigger islands, inhabited ones, and that's where challenges are taking us. And of those 39 islands, 30 are totally pest-free. With pest, I mean mammal species, the invasive mammal species are not present on those islands. So this has been a huge investment over the years, and it's about 60,000 hectares of islands in Mexico that are now in like a path of recovery, which is huge. And there's been a paper just a few weeks back saying that of the countries that, obviously eradications work and they really contribute to protecting biodiversity, but there's just a few countries that have done like 80% of all eradications worldwide. The US is included, Mexico is included as well, and that's really encouraging to have it's like a 100-year analysis of eradications worldwide. And then the benefits, at least that we know of and that we have recorded, so 200+ endemic species benefits. So it's endemic species that it's just found on 1, 2, or a few islands, and so we have helped them with removing the invasive species. But then again, removing invasive species is not just all. So like with the seabirds, we remove species like 10 years from an island, and then the seabirds were around, but they were not coming back, although the island was safe again, and there were these same species nesting on nearby islands. So we started doing a social attraction program on this chain of islands in the Baja California Peninsula. This include, as you can see, it's fiberglass decoys. They were actually made by a local artist in Ensenada that works with fiberglass. And then we started recording calls from these species on different islands where they were nesting. So the idea is to recreate a colony, it's a false one, to let the real birds know that the islands are safe to come back. And so we also do this for ground nesting species. This is different type of burrows. You have the, like the complex where you can have 5 birds or just the single ones. And then the result of this, and this is also a really encouraging thing, is that over about 5 years, we've recovered most of the the historically extirpated seabird colonies recorded in Mexico. So we have 27 species that, because of the presence of invasive species on islands, were extirpated, so they were not nesting on the islands anymore. We removed the invasive species, we did the social attraction techniques, and we have recovered 85% of those. So most of the, the little cartoons you can see, those were extirpated because of invasive species, but now are nesting back on the island. So we want to go and reach the 100%, and that's not only it. We have new breeding colonies on the island that weren't nesting there, and that's probably because of immigration, but also because of the result that there's no threats on these islands anymore. And then we've been talking about the challenges and the complex of working on islands. Even social attraction doesn't work, and that was the case on Guadalupe Island, that we were trying to bring back the black-footed albatrosses, and we started doing social attractions for like 5 years. That didn't work, so we went and said, well, what we can do, and we started working with colleagues from here in the US, from Pacific Rim Conservation. It's an NGO based in Hawaii, and so we said, well, why don't we translocate chicks and eggs of black-footed albatross that are threatened by sea level rise on Midway Atoll in the northern Hawaiian Islands, and bring them to Guadalupe, which is safe, there's no predators, it's a high island. So we did that, and we just moved between 2021 and 2022, about 65 between chicks and eggs, and 61 have been produced and already fledged from Guadalupe Island. So this is one of probably the first project that has been done at translocation internationally. So we're really proud of this project. And we also do a lot of science, because most of the the conservation and restoration we do is based on science, and we also track albatrosses and other seabirds. Like this is the tracks of about 6-7 years of foraging trips for the lice and albatross from Guadalupe, and you can see, they connect a big part of the ocean, and so everything that happens on the island has an impact on these seabirds as well. And then it's not just about doing conservation and restoration, but you also have to do policy work and go into environmental management as well of the islands. And so the stretch of the Baja California Peninsula Islands, they were protected, so we started working with the local fishing communities. They really wanted to protect the islands, so finally this happened in December 2016, and so all the archipelagos of those islands you can see here, from Cerdos to Coronado as well, were the last islands protected in Mexico, and with that, all islands in Mexico are within protected areas, so they have like a legal binding instrument that protects them from different pressures and threats like contamination or big development projects, etc. And then what we do also contributes to national goals and international goals. We have a national species strategy as well as an island strategy, which these actions contribute to. And then we also do other type of things like the Revillagigedo archipelago. We promote it to be created or to be listed as a World Heritage Site. So we developed you have to do like a nomination file that you send to UNESCO through Mexico's government, so we worked on that. And then we went into the field mission to assess that what you were saying on the nomination file was true, and that the site merit has a merit for World Heritage Site. And finally this happened in July 2016, so Revillagigedo archipelago is one of Mexico's World Heritage Sites. And then these kind of promoted other type of things. So the Revillagigedo archipelago was declared a protected area, but it was just these donuts around the islands and the islands. But then there were research saying between research with seabirds and sharks that there was connection amongst the islands. So sharks and seabirds from these islands would move to the others, and so you could see that the protected area wasn't enough for the birds or the sharks or the species that we were trying to protect. So on the nomination file, we proposed kind of these new, or we call it like the buffer zone for the World Heritage Site, which is the red square you can see. And then after UNESCO made it a World Heritage Site, there was like how you could say, like a recommendation for UNESCO saying, hey, you should, protect, make protection stronger on the Revillagigedo archipelago. And the Mexican administration at the moment said, okay, we'll do that. And they went and say, well, we're going to be the biggest protected area, no-take protected area in North America. And so then this became the Revillagigedo National Park, which is the whole kind of water and the islands within the red square. So that's a big win for Mexico and for the world. And then you remember that map of the eradications and all the green dots from the islands that are safe from species. We want to protect that, and we want to have them to be not reinvaded and remain as that. So, but if we do nothing, they might get reinvaded again. So we started this Island Biosecurity National Program. So we want to go to prevention is better than eradication, or is cheaper than eradication. So we started working with the federal government with funds from the Global Environment Facility and others. And then we, right now this is like a national program, island biosecurity, but also the work that we do has a really tight link with environmental education. So we work with the local communities on the islands, but also on the communities that are in the coastal sites that depend on those islands. And we do a lot of different activities like environmental fairs every year on different communities. We take the kids to like field camps as well. Much of like Rosa was saying that you do on here on Ventura and based on the work from the research station and University of the Channel Islands. So this is we do masks of different seabirds, and so we try to connect all the different sciences that get involved on these issues, like social sciences, arts, literature, music even. We have produced a lot of music from the islands with the children and the youth. And so this is just to show you that this is to make island restoration comprehensive or holistic, and that's really what we believe of. And we now have stewards on the islands that are these little kids and the youth that we work with, paintings and murals on the islands as well. And well, they really love them. I mean, there's communities that every year they say, are you coming this year? And they invite us, and they also connect on, helping with the costs, and we put the boats and you can go to the island, and then we house you and things like that. So that's something that they see, they change on the kids and how they get really involved with the local community as well, and with the issue at hand on the islands as well. And then like the big picture is that we have this, goal of removing all invasive species from Mexican islands. That's like a goal we have to 2020-30. It's right around the corner almost, and we still have like 34 islands that are invaded. But we believe that if we keep on track, that we keep working as we're doing, and we keep innovating on the challenges ahead, we will probably do it, and it will be the one of the first countries that can say something like that there's no pests on its islands. And this also comes with strengthening island biosecurity and also working on environmental education with and for environmental, for local communities. So this is like the big global picture of what we're doing in Mexico. And then Luciana, my colleague Luciana Luna, she will then focus on Guadalupe Island to give you like a better example of what ecological restoration is done, or how it's done on an island. So thank you very much, guys.
Yeah, thank you. And we can do questions after Luciana's part of the talk. But for everyone who came in coastal management, Fede, do you mind just introducing yourself briefly and your role at GECI?
Oh yeah, for sure. I'm an oceanographer from undergrad, and then I did a master's and a doctorate on environmental management. And my role on GECI is I'm the executive director. So it's mainly on the overarching managing of the organization, but also mostly fundraising and the policy work that we do. I started as a field biologist and then grew from there. It's been 16 years now working on the NGO, and so yeah, that's and Luciana, she's been with GECI for 20 years now, almost since the foundation, and she's a biologist from the Baja California State University, and she has a PhD on biological sciences we both studied, she her PhD and I my master's on University of Auckland in New Zealand, and so that's us. And Luciana runs our ecology department, and she manages between feral cat eradication on Guadalupe and vegetation restoration as well on Guadalupe, but advises many different projects that we have on ecology on the NGO. So.
That's Sophia back there.
Sophia, yeah.
Incredibly well good.
Good morning. Thank you very much again for the invitation. Well, as Fede was saying, I have been fortunate to be able to see the restoration of a place following for a lot of years, and I'm going to give you some detail about that. So Federico spoke about what we do in all the different islands and all the different species, but Guadalupe is one of the places where we have been able to stay for a longer time. So we set up a real station in there, so we are basically in a permanent spot on there. So it's a very interesting case to be able to look at all the different aspects. So I want to revisit some of the basic. Sorry, my English is a little bit rusty.
Great.
So about ecological restoration. So according to the Society of Ecological Restoration, is a process of assisting the recovery of an ecosystem that has been degraded, damaged, or destroyed. And then what we do to help with that are removing or limiting sources of degradation and assisting a recovery to condition and absence as it was never a degradation place. So, and this is also accounting for anticipated change. So it's very hard to try to get to a situation like many or decades or 100 years before. It's easier in some places than in others. For example, in Europe, where you have like a history of changes for a lot of years, it's more difficult to try to get to the original state compared to other places. So it's great to have a reference model, something that you look at to set up as a goal for your restoration actions. And well, you can, of course we can, our main goal is to get the full recovery, but in some cases we can only get partial. So for Guadalupe, just as I said, the reference ecosystem is what we're trying to replicate. And you get that reference model from being constructed empirically from reference sites, what you can see, and also by all the theory that when you're fortunate enough, you get some old records from species that were there or how were the original distributions. So you combine those to get that information. So Guadalupe is it's very interesting because it's one island that is very related to the Channel Islands. So that's why in this botanical collaborative that was mentioning Rosa at the beginning, it's we thought that it made sense to have this collaboration like across the borders because our islands are so similar because all the regional currents that we have, we share a lot of species, especially Guadalupe. So it's a big island. Sorry about the hectares, I didn't change acres and miles, but it's one of the biggest islands that we have in Mexico. It's very high. It's actually a volcano that is 5 kilometers high, and only the surface you will see close to a kilometer and 300 meters. It's 260 kilometers from mainland, but we actually access to the place from Ensenada, so it's 330 kilometers from Ensenada. It's considered as a dry ecosystem, but similar to the islands in here is mainly we have forests there that are because of the fog. It's a biosphere reserve since 2005. It's inhabited. There's a local fishing community living there basically all year round, and there's also a Navy base and the conservation people, which is the Natural Protected Areas Commission, the Conam people, and us. There's a lot of, as you can imagine, endemic plants. Very interesting because there are many plants coming from the north and also some elements that are coming from the continent, as the palm tree, for example. We have lumbers, seabirds, and invertebrates, no native terrestrial mammals or amphibians or reptiles, and only the only terrestrial mammals were the ones that were introduced. So we had, in the history, we have had cats and the house mice, which we still have, and we had goats and dogs. So what was the problem with the place? The degradation that was given by the goats that were introduced a lot of years ago, and also then the house mice arrived, and then the people thought it was a good idea to bring the cats to control the mice, and of course we ended up 3 species instead of 2. And then the dogs arrived around 1954 by a chance, and there weren't that many years. But looking at the ecological restoration, we started with passive restoration, which was basically remove the trap, and then active restoration, just planning, so this thing of having a reference site, and then doing, for example, as Federico was mentioning, the social attraction techniques for some seabirds that were only restricted to a small area, and we wanted to bring them back to the main island. And well, and of course, this collaboration as the one that we have with the colleagues from this side of the border. So you get all the expertise and all the information, and you go to the field. And so this is actually a view of the island up in the north. And as I was mentioning, you can see all this system of the fog, and it's amazing how the vegetation depends so much on having and takes advantage of all the humidity that gets from the fog, even though you would have and some years, these La Nina years, we don't have that much rainfall, but still the plants are managing to survive with only the fall. So some of the species that we have an endemic cypress, the Guadalupe palm tree, the Pinus radiata, which is, well, the taxonomy is still being discussed, but in this case we consider the endemic variety. We have another one in cedros, the Pinus radiata variedad cedrosensis, and of course the Quercus tomentera, which in Mexico we only have it on Guadalupe. So the problem was the habitat degradation for the presence of the feral goats, and the consequence of having these goats in the island was the collapse of communities. So you will lose, for example, the cypress forest, which you see in this picture, as the loss of all the understory, all the shrubs, the scrubs, even some of the herbs that were just gone, and then you have all this only adult individuals just falling and dying from natural causes, or they were dying faster because of the damage of the goats. So that's something that you will see in all the vegetation communities. So and that was actually a picture from 1985. You can see the goat in here and all the eroded and basically only the rocks in there. And then so we took out the feral goats. We did eradication. It was completed in 2007. So that was a passive restoration part, and all the vegetation came back, and which was very useful for our reference model. So you go to the field and you see which species are occurring where, and you take note of that, and then you put it together with all the information that we have from a great book from the Flora of Guadalupe Island from 1996, together with some of the works, for example, from Bauer in 2005. So he did a map of how he imagined all the communities were originally distributed. And also, again, going to the field and looking, for example, this is the Cenotus arborius, which was, the first record was in 2004. And of course, that was there before, but we never saw it because of the goats. And then all that information, it was brought to develop the active restoration plan. So for that is just to see, to try to recover the natural distribution, the original distribution of the communities. And well, as I said, a lot of expertise in collaboration with other similar projects that have been done with the same species in other places, in similar places. And well, we started with only just a map showing the original distribution. For example, the cypress forest used to be all this a big patch, and then ended up having all the remnant with the front goats, these green spots. And then what we're trying to do now is just to connect those patches. So that's pretty much what we're trying to do. And some of this, or a lot of the species were restricted only to some isolated places. For example, for the oaks, there were only 50 left, and not all are producing acorns every year, or they start to produce, but then for the drought they lose the acorns. So other species, as this one, there's another of the Channel Islands, and some plants, as this one at the end, is an endemic one, Cistanthe guadalupensis. That one is only on the islands. In the main island, we have seen only one plant, so it's just collecting the seed from the islands and bringing them to produce it at the nursery, and then take all that plant to the reforestation site. So this is just an image of the nursery that we had to build. We're very lucky because we got the permits from all the entities to build on the island, and we have a spring. Without that, we cannot have done it. So this is another endemic plant. So this were very few and restricted to only some areas, and now we are producing a lot of those at the nursery. One part that was very important was to be sure that the plant was being, because since the soil is volcanic and it's very, well, it's not as rich as it used to be before. So just to take wherever you can to take a stronger plant to the field. So for that is that all the mycorrhiza and fungi that dies from the island. So it's just some pictures of the reforestation site. So this is all the cypress forest trying to connect the patches. And another picture of the now with the plants a little bit bigger. And then the pine forest as well. You can see all the small plants just taking it. And just talking about a little bit about the feral cats. So, well, the problem, as in many places, you know, as an extinction, we have like extinction of the waterfowl saltwater, we haven't been able to find it again. Extinction of other, subspecies of lamberts, heavy predation of the albatross. And then we started with control because it was urgent, just to protect the lice and albatross colony. But for that, we need to answer some questions. So, for example, in some places, when you have rodents, invasive rodents, when you remove the cat which is controlling the population of rodents, then you get an explosion of rodents, and then you have a big problem as well. So, but that doesn't happen in all the ecosystems. So we needed, if we wanted to go for the cat eradication, we needed to investigate first if it was possible to do it. And at the end, the research said that it was feasible. The thing is that the house mice on Guadalupe Island, it's controlled bottom up. So it's basically depending on the rain and then on the seed of the introduced grasses. So if you have rain, you will have a lot of mice, and then a lot of cats, because cats follow the prey. But if you don't have rain, then it doesn't matter if you had the cats to control the mice or not, you wouldn't have mice, because there's no food for them. So what I'm trying to say is that even though you can have a lot of cats eating a lot of mice, if you have seeds, there's no way that cats can even control the mice in the long term. So, well, we started with control, setting up a fence and creating like a peninsula free of feral cats, and then we started going up for the eradication. And we set up that fence because we saw that if we have done nothing, then the lice and albatross colony, which started as very new, they colonized in around 1980s. It was have gone down, and with the control, it's going following this blue line. And if we go for eradication, it will go up. And then, well, just an images of some of the we're using trapping, and also a lot of camera traps used to follow the eradication. A great tool is to use detection dogs. We're using dogs for that. And that's basically for Guadalupe to continue with we need to continue with the restoration efforts and protection. And we still have a lot of questions to answer. Of course, as in any restoration work, to secure funding in the long term to protect all the investment and just to protect the communities that are fauna and flora that are doing so well. And of course, we have learned a lot, and we still are, and we have a lot to learn. So that's it. Thank you very much. And of course, this is a work of a lot of organizations, both from international, like global, and Mexican, and of course here from a lot of colleagues from the States. And well, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And we definitely have time for questions. And just a housekeeping note, if people do need to step out, if you didn't sign a sign-in sheet when you came in, if folks came in late, go ahead and sign that in sign out. Any questions for Fede and Luciana? I'm sure there's a few. Renee, go ahead.
I'm curious if you guys know how, if the federal waters extend out this same distance throughout the whole border of Mexico, and like how do the islands affect that, if you guys would know?
Yeah, because of the protection of the islands, it varies from island to island. So there's the rule is that either the island has like a donut around, so those waters within that donut are protected, or it could be like a polygon. Like on Guadalupe, for example, the biosphere reserve is the island, and then it has like a polygon that's within. And it also varies depending on the type of protected area. Like national parks are the most restrictive. So the Reviquedo National Park, there's no fishing allowed within. But like on Guadalupe Island, the biosphere reserve, because there's a local community, it allows artisanal fishing like lobster and abalone. But that's it. No actually there's a current change on the management plan, and so it was really renowned because of white shark cage diving, Guadalupe Island, and also there's a lot of trips for sport fishing, for tuna and bluefin tuna and different yellowfin as well. And there's a current plan to change that and to restrict those activities and just, leave for artisanal fishing. So it depends on the type of island and the type of protected area. But yeah, most of them, if there's communities, they allow, of course, the fishing. And some of them, like Cedros Island, it banned completely like industrial fishing because of the problems it caused to the local fishing communities, because the boats will, remove everything, but also because of the impacts to the local economy as well. So yeah, it varies. I don't know if that answered you.
Yeah. So I know US, I think, goes up to like 12 nautical miles.
Oh yeah, it's the same. Yeah.
Oh,
Like
okay.
territorial waters, we have what's called the territorial seas. So that's not 12 nautical miles from the mainland, and then you have the exclusive economic zone, which is 24 more nautical miles. So on the map, that's the whole loop around and the bubbles and things like that funny shape. That's whole Mexican territorial waters. So the idea with that is that it's based on an international convention, the law of the sea, and then it allows, it gives preference to the country to use the natural resources, all of them, oil, fishing, etc., within its exclusive economic zone. So it's like exclusive rights. But if the country can't or won't use them, other countries could with an agreement with the country.
Thank you.
Other questions? Let's come over to Dr. Ryan.
Yeah, so I'm really interested that you're doing this work on some islands that are inhabited and have fishing communities and populations, and some that are uninhabited. And I'm wondering if you sort of have a reflection on sort of the comparison between doing restoration in fully uninhabited spaces versus those where there's active human communities, and how that compares sort of across the board, so many islands.
Yeah, well, in a way, of course, if it's uninhabited, it's easier in a way because of you just go and do the work. On those that are inhabited, it's not difficult but challenging, like to convince, especially with particular invasive species, like for example feral dogs or feral cats that people are attached to. It's quite challenging to convince them to that those species do not belong on an island and the impacts they do. So it takes probably more time on doing a project, but at the end it's probably more beneficial because on an inhabited island after these negotiations and working with the community and hearing them out as well, they become the stewards for the island and for restoration and invasive species work. So it's a thin line where you kind of, because then you also have to put in their kind of shoes as well, and it's not that us biologists saying, well, feral cats are not allowed on the island and it's banned and the protected area says that and Mexico's government says that, but they have their own rationale for having them. Like for example, on Guadalupe, what they say is that it's more to control the mouse on the island rather than the attachment. But there's also that the kids want the cats and they're isolated and they want a pet like they do in the mainland. So that's probably the challenging part. But at the end, I guess as a reflection, it's more beneficial and way more interesting because you can see how the communities really connect after you get an understanding how they connect to the conservation work and make that conservation work endurable on time.
I'm just curious because you've been so great about sort of collecting data and setting and publishing on the work that you're doing, and that seems like a really neat kind of meta-analysis of like restoration success on all these different islands based on this one, sort of looking at that one variable.
Yeah. I mean, that would be interesting. Yeah, because it's been done not with a focus on islands, but yeah, definitely there's some research saying that as we kind of evolve on island restoration, there's more islands inhabited, and it's not just like 100 people of a local community. It's like islands where there's thousands of people and like cities, and that's the challenge. And you know, most of the conclusions are it's not just like environmental science work, but you have to involve social sciences as well. It's like New Zealand. New Zealand is trying to get rid of all of its invasive pests from the country, which is 2 big islands, and they know that. I mean, they're doing a lot of social science work with indigenous communities as well, because they have the Maori, and so that's something definitely we have to take into account more and more.
Cool. Other questions? Go ahead, John.
Yeah, so I have a question related to that, which is, have you seen, maybe it's too early, but have you seen increases in either like ecotourism visitors or residents in the wake of these restorations of these different islands?
Yeah, I mean, definitely more local-based tourism as well. It's a two-phase coin, because 25 years ago, islands were kind of unknown for the average Mexican in Mexico, and as we kept on working, and the word came out, and islands are a paradise, and there's a lot of biodiversity. It also comes with the pressure of let's do tourism in those islands when there's already tourism on the mainland. And what we are promoting, and that's why most of the protected areas have been done with the local communities. It's like, okay, let's promote tourism, but done by the local communities on a sustainable way. So that's mostly where it's heading. It hasn't kind of lived up as we wanted in like 20 years, but it's been moving forward quite a lot. So now there's lots of these fishing communities that they are organizing to have like proper enterprises and do local tourism with seeing either birds or hiking on the islands and housing people there and cooking them abalone or lobster, and so they're trying to make this kind of something of their own livelihoods along with fishing as well.
And are most of those visitors Mexican nationals, or are they international tourists, or who's coming to visit
I
mostly?
suppose it's more international than national. I mean, it depends on the island, but yeah, it's mostly international. Like people that hears about the Baja California Peninsula and I mean other islands in Mexico as well. There's a lot of islands for tourism in Southeast Mexico, like Cozumel or Isla Mujeres, but it's totally a different setting. I mean, Cozumel, it's a big island. It's really well preserved, but there's like 10 cruises every day. So it's a different type of scenario. But yeah, I mean, it's probably more international, although more and more it's also national tourism. It's wanting to connect to the islands.
Go ahead.